I have been at GMBN for over 5 years now, and in that time, I've done some pretty wild challenges. And I thought it's about time we went back, checked out my top 5 gnarliest challenges I've done, but also speak to some people who were there along the way, and also what lessons I learned and what I can impart onto you guys. Right, kicking things off at number 5, we're going back to 2022. It was the summer and I had hair at the time. Oh, the good old days. This was man versus machine. And essentially the new Garmin Edge 1040 had just come out and I went to see if I could beat it. It was in the Ligurian coastline, Finale Ligure to be exact, and it was going to be one of my first proper 24-hour events, which is why this one has made the cut. And also, the extreme weather, high temperatures of 35 degrees in the daytime, an unrelenting course where I just lapped over and over. 17 laps I did in total. And this one really was an eye-opener because it was my first sort of continuous 24-hour as well. Now, don't take my word for it, the numbers don't lie. In total, I rode 180 kilometers, 7,941 calories burnt, 16 hours, 10 of solid riding time and an elevation gain of 4,023 meters. Numbers I was very proud of at the time, but do you know what? It was the course that actually made this one really tough as well. It was, as I said, non-stop. That monotony of just going round and round the same thing, especially at night when you've got no points of reference, you can't see very much, you're just going round, you go, oh, I'm here again, I'm here again. A big takeaway on this one and a lesson I think that I learned and maybe I could pass on to you as well. If you're doing these huge events where it is multiple laps, is to kind of break them down into individuals. So don't think about the race in its entirety because you'll go absolutely bonkers when you go, oh, I've got another 20 laps to go or something like that. Break each lap down and maybe try and set a little goal for each one. That's what I did on this. I kept my kit to a minimum, so I try and set little lap times or try and hit a corner a bit faster each time, and that kept things pretty fresh and going for me. The big question, man versus machine. Did I beat machine? No, I didn't. That thing was an absolute monster of a head unit. At the end, it still had 11% of the battery life left. I think a total of 6 hours it could have kept going on for. I certainly couldn't, but I did finish off with a nice dip in the sea. But what is at number 4? In at number 4 on the list, and the first race to feature, this one was from Ligure in France, and it was the UCI Mountain Bike Marathon World Cup. And oh my God, was it an eye-opener. This was an insane race. It was so tough. But in fact, before we get into the kind of the numbers, the stats, and I talk a bit more about the race, don't take my word for it. Here's what Blake had to say.
Rich looked absolutely on top form at the start. Coming near the end of the race, it looked like he was the walking dead. The track was incredible, beautiful, picturesque, what you would expect out there in the Alps. It started off with the most brutal climb out to the right of this huge valley, descends down into the valley and then goes up over another mountain range. But it looked spectacular. Would I ever try this event? Yes, I probably would. I would give it a go, give it my best shot, but I think my fitness needs to be way higher, way higher than it is now. Did I think Rich would finish? Yes, I had no doubt that he would finish the event, but my expectations kind of dropped because near the end of this race, I was right there watching him come up this crazy, brutal climb. He was basically pushing his bike, going, I am dead, this is gnarly. And I was like, maybe he's not going to be able to finish this race because he looked exactly like what I said, the walking dead.
Yeah, thank you for that, Blake. And obviously, I appreciate your support. It was great having you there. But I do have some stats. So the race was 100 kilometers long, 5,831 calories burnt, a riding time or solid race time of 8 hours, 2 minutes on the go, 3,843 meters climbed. Now, this race was really tough. It was my first full-on marathon race, and the intensity is what got me here. I wasn't sort of prepared for it. It was really hard going. Literally, as soon as the gun went off, it was along the valley floor, and we just went into a huge 800-meter climb. And it was the guys and the pace around me that was the big eye-opener. Just the quickness they went up the climb so early on in the race. And as the race sort of developed on, I kind of settled into a rhythm and things were okay and I was holding my own, but I was drifting a little bit towards the back of the pack and I was sort of learning about pacing myself. The weather conditions weren't too bad on this one, luckily. It was a good day for shorts and t-shirts. The bike was riding really well and it was stunning views. But it was that relentless pace which really got me. And I learned a lot here, all about pacing myself. Towards the final stages of the race, sort of the 80k onwards, I was at the kind of the back of the pack, if you like, and I had the sweeper bikes that followed me for the entire way for the last 20k, but I did make the time checkpoint and I actually ended up crossing the line in 17th. And bear in mind, I think that was only a 30% finish rate. I was last, but I finished, and I think about 40 people hadn't, so it was still a solid result. The big takeaway from this was learning about pacing, learning about not going too fast straight away, learning to fuel consistently throughout the race, no matter how hard that might be, even if it was at the food stop. And we're going to keep that tally running of numbers as well. So at this point, I had covered 280 kilometers, 13,772 calories burnt, a total elevation 7,866, and I've been riding for a solid 1 day and 12 minutes. But what's in at number 3? We are now at the top 3 for my gnarliest challenges I think I've ever done. But I tell you what, before we go into them, let me know in the comments down below what you think they are, because I think this third one is going to surprise a few people. In at number 3 is 24 hours in the old Pueblo. I know a few people will be thinking, why isn't it number 1? Because this was famously the race that put me in hospital. But here's why I've put it at number 3. This is the race I actually did twice. The first time, well, yeah, ending up in hospital with something called rhabdomyolysis, where essentially, my muscles broke down and all the horrible toxins went in and I could not finish. We went back for a second attempt. Cameraman Louis joining me again, and here's what he thought of the race.
So we arrived to Tucson, Arizona, and the desert there is actually the Sonoran Desert, which is like high altitude desert, which means that it gets kind of extreme weathers. It gets really cold at night. When we arrived, actually, it was actually snowy, which is quite weird to see, snow in the desert. Rich is actually annoyingly positive all the time, even when you're about to do something that's quite strenuous and difficult, extremely strenuous and difficult. He's very annoyingly positive. But I think he keeps himself in that headspace because, I mean, if you're going into something like that with any negative thoughts, then you're going to carry that through. And then when you're in your darkest hour, that's just going to multiply. So I think that's his technique, really.
Yeah, thanks for that, Louis. Obviously, amazing to have you there. It was a wild race, but the reason this has been bumped down to number 3 is because the weather. It was too flipping nice. We had great weather during the day. Although you're at altitude, it's quite hot, it's quite dusty and arid out there. In comparison to what's coming, it was a pleasure. And it did get cold at night when, in the desert. The desert does do that. But essentially, it wasn't just as gnarly as what's coming up, but it was a great learning curve again. I learned sort of a lot about resilience, and I think that's something we can all take away there, the resilience that is required to maybe go back and overcome your fears, overcome those obstacles that you had on the first round. A lot of people would end up in hospital and go, well, I'm not going to go back and do that again. Yeah, actually, that redemption is what I was after. I wanted to go back and finish the race. I didn't want to leave anything unfinished, essentially, which it was. So, yeah, we went back and it does provide some pretty gnarly statistics as well. Let me grab my computer here because we've got some pretty crazy numbers. So 24 hours in the old Pueblo, when I completed it, second time, 317 kilometers ridden, 9,401 calories, 17 hours and a half or 29 minutes riding time and 4,250 meters climbed, giving a running total throughout the video of the 3 challenges so far, 597k, 23,173 calories, 12,000 meters or 12,116 meters climbed, and 1 day, 17 hours and 41 minutes solid riding time. And do you know what? The 24-hour race, or the 24-hour concept as a whole, is a fascinating one, and one I find really interesting. At the race, I managed to finish 13th out of 111 in solo men. So it wasn't just going back for that redemption, but doing well really gave a good sense of accomplishment. And I think that's something that I took away from it, and I think that's something that hopefully will inspire you guys out there to have a go at these kind of gnarly challenges as well, that it can be done and you can do it. But we need to go to number 2. Number 2. This one I think slipped under the radar. It's been a fair while, and I don't think we made enough of a fuss about this one. Not just for me, but for the crew as well. And it was how far I could ride in 24 hours. It was the San Helen way, essentially riding the full distance of Wales, from the north in Conway all the way down to Swansea in the south, here in the UK. And it was brutal. And what earned this one its second place was the fact that it rained the entire time and was longer than 24 hours. And it wasn't just the fact that it rained, it was really tough riding as well. There was horrendous hiker bikes to start with, and then midway through I got to a point where the road just disappeared. The path was no more. The GPS said it was there and it was nothing. It was middle of the night and I couldn't see a thing. It was a low point. I was getting cranky, I was getting annoyed, but you had to keep going. So there I was trying to follow the GPS as best I could as I hiker-biked my way through a bog. But that's all part of these challenges. As the challenge progressed on, the cold started setting in, and that time frame of just could I do this entire route in 24 hours getting closer and closer. As day broke, well, it wasn't looking likely. One of the cameramen, Louis again, in fact, she joined me for part of the ride, and I threw a tantrum. We didn't make it. We got lost again. We ended up in the middle of nowhere. We weren't where we should have been. And I was just like, do you know what? Well, in fact, here's what I said. And we get a bit lost. I'm like, Louis, this is nuts. I can't just get lost and keep going around. So we figure out a different route. Yeah, it was a dark time. And the 24-hour mark had arrived. And we didn't make it, annoyingly. I was gutted. The crew had been unbelievable through the night. We'd ploughed on, the planning, the prep, everything had done really good. I even wore a backpack. I hardly ever wear a backpack. I wore a backpack for this one. But you know what? We wanted to get to the finish. We wanted to get to Swansea. So we kept going past the 24 hours and we trucked on and we made it the whole way. And in fact, stats, well, here's some numbers for you. It was a total 290 kilometers, 8,251 calories, 19 hours, 19 minutes of solid moving time, and 5,321 meters climbed in total. It was brutal. A big lesson I learned on this one was the preparation, clothing and equipment, because some of those horrible scenarios I was talking to you about and just dealing with weather for that long, you need the right kit. So it really was sort of a lesson in preparation, and one I would pass on to you. If you're looking at doing these kind of extreme weather challenges, do your research, do the prep, kind of learn what sort of clothing and equipment you're going to need to get you through the time that you're going to be on the bike, and it can make things pleasurable, certainly bearable. But what about the running total? Well, the running total is 887 kilometers, 31,424 calories, 17,437 meters climbed, and a solid 2 days and 13 hours of riding time. But now it's time for the big one. Let me know in the comments what you think number 1 of my gnarliest challenges I've ever done is. And let's get to it. In at number 1, I've had to come outside because this one is mind-blowing. It is, of course, the Strathpuffer, a 24-hour race that I did in the Highlands of Scotland in deepest, darkest winter. This one did indeed have some truly mind-boggling numbers, some horrendous weather, which we're going to get to, but I dragged my poor old partner Amy along for this one as well as support crew. Here's what she had to say first.
They were average 0 degrees. It wasn't too bad when we first arrived to set up, but then I think there was freezing rain at one point, which Rich didn't really like very much, and it just got very muddy throughout the night. The freezing rain got to him, and for the man that never wears gloves or never gets cold, I think he did have a little bit of a cry at one point. So I think I had to bring him into the RV and possibly put his hands under my armpits to warm them up. It was definitely the freezing rain, because I think it just had those conditions he'd just never been in before, and I think it took him by surprise. And then also just the time in those conditions. So just to have to keep on trucking through those conditions, and it gets really cold, obviously, in the night, and we had a fire going outside. But for him to not be able really to come inside the RV to then warm up, because you know you're just not going to want to go back outside again.
Thank you very much, darling. Appreciate your support as always, of course. But what truly made the Strathpuffer #1 on this list and the gnarliest thing I've done? Well, average temperature was 0 degrees with it dipping to -2. It rained for a lot of the time. 17 hours of darkness ridden in. Some say 18, I'm gonna go 17 if you don't include dusk. It was truly a mental test, which really did push me to my absolute limits. This was as well my first ever 24-hour race, but of the 500 participants that started, I managed to finish I was very pleased, respectable 7th place in solo male category. It had everything. I mean, the riding was great, but brutal. It literally would grind your bike down into a pace. And at one point, there was a bout of freezing rain where, well, I didn't think I was going to go on. And Amy said I actually nearly cried, and thinking about it, I probably did. But what did I learn? What could we learn from this experience? Well, digging deep is what I learned here, really having to kind of knuckle down, get on with the job in hand. And it's where you kind of, sounds cheesy, but you find sort of yourself. You kind of get to grips with what you can do and what you can push your limit to if you really want to achieve something. I want you guys and girls out there to think the same thing. Next time you're struggling with a big epic ride, a race, a challenge, whatever you might be doing, just think that actually you can do it. And if not, think back to when I nearly cried with some freezing rain. But before we finish the video, let me give you those stats. Well, from Strathpuffer alone, it was 223 kilometers of racing, 9,834 calories burnt, 19 hours, 15 minutes saddle time, and 6,035 meters climbed, a staggering amount. But what was the running total across all 5 challenges, I hear you ask? And it was a monstrous amount, 1,110k ridden, 41,258 calories, elevation, 23,478, 3 days, 8 hours, 15 minutes, solid saddle time. That's 78 hours, 15 minutes. An unbelievable amount. But I want to know what you think of my top 5. Do you think it was the right order? Have I missed any out? And don't think that we're going to sit on our laurels here. No, I want to hear what gnarly challenges you've got out there as well that you think I could do. Drop them in the comments down below. It's been an absolute pleasure, and here's to many more years. I'll see you later.